That's as high as I would go. But he's loved by many and revered by even more. Okay, so I guess I'll pass this around here too. Here's a picture. Here's a photograph of Paul Gauguin. This is his daughter, one of his daughters. She died when she was in her 20s. And this is Emile. He's my cousin. That's how this all started. Emile was my cousin, but really he was also my virtual grandfather because he was about 70 years old when I got to know him. Anyway, he married my cousin, and that's how he's my cousin. Sorry, but I'm related, kind of. Okay. Okay. Here's a guy here. You know who this is?
Van Gogh.
Huh? Van Gogh. Yeah, Van Gogh. He's got movies made out of him, for him and so forth. So and you can see a bandage on there. What's he famous for? Not his paintings. What's he famous for?
Cutting his ear off.
Got his ear cut off. Well, in my book, back here in the index, back in the appendix, there's another way of this how he lost his ear. And there's a book written about it, and I've referred to it, and so it's only about a page or two, but John, you can read that. It's sum through it, and you'll find the real story as to how he lost his ear. Paul was an excellent swordsman. He was an excellent swordsman. He fought in the Franco-Prussian War during during that 1-year war. He was in the Navy, and he learned how to use a saber. Got pretty good at it. Anyway, I'm kind of giving the story away. But okay, and then this is a picture here of Paul Gauguin as a self-portrait. So this is a self-portrait minus an ear, and this is a self-portrait minus a sword. So pass that around, and okay. Now let's see. Let's start up here. We got a little thing here. What would you think of France, Paris, France? What was this? What's a building like that building there? The Arc de Triomphe, right? Who built the Arc de Triomphe?
He said Napoleon.
And Napoleon #1. He didn't call himself Napoleon #1 because he didn't know there was going to be a 2 and a 3. But at any rate, this is Napoleon Bonaparte built that, and he's an amazing guy. I mean, if you really got to read his biography, it is unbelievable. A lot of good stuff on YouTube about Napoleon Bonaparte. But so. Okay, do you know why one side of the street are even numbers and the other side of the street are odd? And who determined that?
No, that's been a mystery to me.
Napoleon, right. He also created a legal system, which we don't have in the United States, but I'm not going to ask you that question. You know the answer, but I'm not going to ask you anyway. So anyway, Roger's declining to get into this argument. But anyway, Napoleonic law was kind of spread all over the world because it was one of the best legal systems available, except in England, which they already had a legal system. So this was one of the problems with England and France. They differed in their legal system. So in any case, Arc de Triomphe, even number, odd number streets. He also put in lots of boulevards in Paris, and of course he was a great military man, and you all know about his problem with he met his Waterloo and these other things going to his foray into Russia and so forth. But so we're kind of focusing on the negative stuff, but he is actually an incredible leader of men, warriors. He screwed up a couple times, but most of the time he was a winner. Okay, all right. So that's a little bit. Okay, let's get over here to Teresa. Teresa, what about Teresa? Well, she was wealthy, very wealthy, and she lived during the Reign of Terror. Everybody know what the Reign of Terror is? Okay, this was terrible. This was terrific. This was horrible. 40,000 people, wealthy people, had their heads removed by the guillotine. 40,000 people. That was the reign of terror. Well, Teresa and her family said, no way, man, we're wealthy. We have a number on us. We're heading out of here. So they walked over the Pyrenees into Spain. And while she was there, she met a guy by the name of Mariano Tristan. And they got married, and everything was very happy. And he said, let's go back to France. It's calmed down now. The reign of terror is over with. I'm gonna get a big villa there. And so he had this huge villa there, which he was going to try to turn into a famous art collection and so forth. And as soon as it was finished, he died. And Teresa was turned into a pauper. She didn't have any money. Why? Well, first of all, women didn't have access to money. Second of all, she couldn't prove that she was married to Tristan. She was married in Spain. And France said, no way. A Spanish marriage, they're worthless. So what happened? This guy took all their money, all their real estate, and left her with zero. But she did have a daughter. Actually, there were a couple of other kids too, Flora. And so Flora is covered in chapter 2. And the point here is that she was famous in her own right. Flora Tristan. Any feminists here? Nobody raising their hands. Okay. Well, anyway, she was the first feminist. In fact, she wrote a book a year. Can you imagine that? Writing a book a year. She only lived 10 more years. Her first book was on year 1. Her 10th book was when she died. So she was an incredible person, and I say I spent chapter 2 on her. She is an unbelievable person, and famous, and in Paris and France and maybe even elsewhere. She's like a saint. Every year, people just cover her grave with flowers. So anyway, Flora, you can read about her. She's really good. She had a daughter, Aileen. Aileen was probably had the worst luck of any person you can possibly imagine. Aileen is covered in chapter 3, and this is what this book here is good about, because we actually tell the truth about who Aileen was. Other biographers have just called her a courtesan, basically a high-priced prostitute, but she was far from that. She was a tough and aggressive person. You didn't want to mess with her. And we've got letters that from South America that were kept, and so we know about them. And those letters tell a different story than what. Anyway, these are the first time these letters have been discussed, so it's worth it for that. Okay, well, where does Aileen come into the story? Well, she married a guy by the name of Clovis Gauguin. Clovis Gauguin was a great journalist. He was a journalist, kind of like the guys that would write for the Washington Post. They hated the French government. They hated Napoleon III. This was Louis Napoleon. He actually got into politics, and they hated him. They were writing really nasty stuff about him, and there was actually a gag order to stop all of the free press. So Clovis said, "Man, I'm out of here." His uncle Zizi was already deported. So he said, "I'm going to self-deport myself." And Aileen, she had a desire that her mother had to get her rightful inheritance. You got to remember, Teresa was a pauper. She lived like in a little hovel. I mean, you think about the worst place you can think of living here in Santa Clarita. No, even not Santa Clarita. You have to go down into maybe Chicago on the south side. You got to really find a place that you know, it is miserable living. And this is what she did, and this is where Flora came from. And Aileen and Clovis said, we're out of here. Clovis was trying to save his life. He said, I'm gonna self-deport myself. And Aileen was going to get money from that old skinflint, Tristan. Tristan was very wealthy. He had estates in South America. He was actually the viceroy to the territory of Peru. But any case, so this is where Napoleon III comes in. So again, they thought Napoleon was going to really screw them to the wall. But guess what? Napoleon III became so magnificent, so magnanimous, that he actually created the modern Paris that we all love. I mean, you got to go there. I mean, and I didn't see any hands waving. Yeah, I've been there. There's some great movies. One of them is Midnight in Paris. I don't know if you've seen Midnight in Paris in there, but there was one character in Midnight in Paris who was
Paul Gauguin.
Paul Gauguin, right. So Owen Wilson goes through this magical time machine, and he goes back and sees people like Paul Gauguin. Any case, this guy, Napoleon III, was unbelievable in terms of creating this modern Paris. He hired a guy by the name of Haussmann, Haussmann. Haussmann was absolutely brilliant. He looked at the city of Paris, and he said, you know, things have to be done. They tore down slums. They tore them down, and they built other stuff. They built these beautiful boulevards. And I'll give you another picture here you can look at. And this is this little picture over here is probably his gem, the Paris Opera House. It was actually called the Palais Garnier. This outdoes any kind of palace you could think about. Remember, we went there. You have to just Google it, and you'll see picture after picture of this beautiful structure. At any rate, Haussmann was responsible for this. Garnier started to build it. In fact, this is the beginning of the Palace Garnier, or the Paris Opera House. This is taken from a balloon of the almost finished Paris Opera House. So I'll pass this around. So this is dated here, 1862, and this is, I don't know what the date on this is, but it's obviously later. And so you can also see all these boulevards. You can see new construction and so forth. But up here, there's some apartment buildings. If you look in the back here in these apartment buildings, this is where Paul Gauguin lived as a little boy. And he ran more than likely, he was a real terror. He was a hellion. He used to go, in fact, his cousin in Colombia, in Peru rather, called him a little devil. And he says, how's the little devil, when he's writing to his mother, or his sister. So in any case, he probably lived in one of these apartment houses here. It's a very swank part of town. And in any case, so I'll hand this around. You can take a look at this and to see what this is. Here's another one here. You can get this around so you can dwell on those. So the idea here is that Napoleon III was a benevolent despot. He made himself emperor. He was that for about 19 years, I think, and he did all of this. You say, well, what happened to the poor people? He put them to work. He put them to work tearing down these slums, and so everybody was employed. They had like 100% employment. Even vagabonds and people that were homeless, they were employed. And so there was plenty of money. I don't know where. You're gonna have to find out where it came from. I don't think he did it all himself. But there was a lot of money coming into Paris because they were investors. They said, look at this beautiful place. Look at all this stuff. We're going to buy into this. So that's probably where they got the money from. So any case, we get down here to Paul, who is he's a problem child. He was always into trouble, and so eventually he became an artist. And of course, you know the story about Paul Gauguin. You ever hear people say, "Oh, I'm going to pull a Paul Gauguin"? What do you mean by that? I'm going to leave my family. I'm going to say goodbye to all of that trouble, raising these screaming kids, and forgetting about this, and go to a nice tropical island. Ever feel like, guys, ever feel like pulling a Paul Gauguin? I don't think too much about it. But he actually lived a miserable life, and part of it was his own doing. He just was always, he was always getting in fights with people. I mean, people said, "Oh man, he was so mean to somebody." He was this way always. He was this way probably maybe when people are in their terrible twos. He never left. That's the way he was, and so he dissed everybody. I mean, even there were Catholic priests that he just was having huge arguments with, and screaming matches and so forth. So anyway, that's about all of it. See if I got anything more here. I'm going to open this up to questions. One thing here, this was the Second Empire here. This was called the Second Empire. Empire meaning that it was run by an emperor. And I mean, there are people like, I don't know whether you ever heard of Jules Verne.
Yes.
Yes.
He wrote that, okay? Emile Zola, Victor Hugo. These are people. What about Monet and Manet? Can you tell the difference between Monet and Manet? Okay, well, at any rate, there were a lot of others. Renoir, Cezanne, they all were in this Second Empire. I mean, it was like the flourishing of art and music. Any people wear leotards? Anybody have leotards on? It came from Jules Leotard. That was his name, Leotard. That's where the pants came from, or the whatever they are. Anyway, he was a gymnast, and he was a flying trapeze, and so forth. So all of these people were, with their vaudeville. Ever hear of that? It came from there. You really got to read about this, because it is exciting stuff as to how all this, spelled out. Okay, but France was having and I might say, put an end to this. Napoleon III was having a little bit of an argument with his friends, the Prussians. And so they eventually got yelling at each other back and forth, and eventually the Prussians mounted up and they rode in their cavalry. They circled France. They circled Paris. They started they started to starve out. Would not allow any food to go in. And the Second Empire. This is where they had coffee. They had to develop a way to have coffee and food and so forth. This is where the great French cuisine started. But when the Prussians circled the city, these people were starving to death. Elaine and her kids. I shouldn't put it this way. Elaine she actually left. Garnier, he left. They went to the south of France. They escaped. They found out about it, I guess, somehow or other. So they saved their lives. But a lot of people died during the Franco-Prussian War, and it only lasted a year. But one of the things that they did with the Prussians is they captured this guy, Napoleon III. They hauled him back to Prussia, and I guess he had to buy his way out for freedom, and so he went to England, escaped, I guess, and he went to England, and he died 3 years later. So that's the end of his story, and I guess that's the end of the talk.
I'm trying to remember my art history class, and I had a very good instructor. Gauguin was Impressionist. Was that an Impressionist?
No, he's a post-Impressionist.
So after
The Impressionists were like Cezanne and Renoir and Monet. Monet was the one that really was the first Impressionist. He had these beautiful pastels and these gardens and so forth. Manet, on the other hand, was probably pre-impressionistic. He did realistic paintings of people and so forth.
Because I noticed
With or without clothing,
Gauguin is more like photorealistic, kind of close to realistic, so that's why
they call it post-impressionist. Post-impressionist. That was the area. I can't tell you who other post-impressionists, but he had a lot of trouble having his paintings displayed because he started out in impressionism, but the art community that governed the choice of paintings to be displayed and for competitions and so forth. If you were an impressionist, you weren't going to get into that circle. You just weren't. And so the impressionists were kind of like the underground, but this is when they flourished. And so you'll look at all these paintings. You can go back and just look at Cézanne and particularly Renoir. He had a lot of great paintings of around the Second Empire, Paris. So as I say, it was a golden era, and it's still there. You can always go back and visit. I've been there several times. Patty and I went about how long ago? At any rate, it's still there. And as I say, Napoleon III, he said, there were a lot of suburbs around. He incorporated them all. He said, okay, you're part of Paris now. And so their taxes went up, and they were a little bit angry about this. But at any rate, this is what an emperor can do, and you can't do it with a Congress and a House of Representatives. They'll be arguing and arguing. You can't get anything done. You have to really be a strong leader, and so this is what he decided to do. And as I say, it was just like amazing. And so, please, I'm not a travel agent, but you got to go to Paris. If there's anything on your bucket list, Paris. Not Paris, Texas.
Is it true in Paris there's a geomagnetic field?
Sorry?
Which in Paris, is it true that there's some kind of something in the air in Paris, something about the energy in Paris where it makes you get in a very romantic mood?
I think so. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there are these wonderful little. I mean, you're laughing, but I mean, it is. There's an atmosphere. I mean, there are these little cafes and so forth. And all these little. These are little places where these guys used to hang out. This is what Midnight in Paris is kind of all about. That these great intellectuals and not just not like artists and musicians and so forth. This was a time of commerce. This is a time of where great banking. The Rothschilds. This is where they grew up. So that it was a center for not only for the arts but for business. I mean, in fact, it was probably even stronger for business because and they bought the art. And as I say in chapter 1 and in chapter 3, we go over some of the stuff because I don't want to spoil it for you. You got to buy the book.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. How do they start to having relatives here in South America?
Yeah, well, okay. Paul had a sister named Marie, and she married. See you, John. Thanks for coming. Yeah, good luck on the writing. Buy one of his books, John Mackenzie. He writes a lot of. He's got a whole series of Western books, early American Western. Aline had 2 kids, Marie and Paul. Aline is, chapter 3 that's worth the price of the book, because she is an incredible person, and her mother Flora was too. I mean, she was kind of like it's almost like magical. I have in chapter 2 I have actually a quotation, a 3-page quotation of what she gets into the argument with the abbot of an abbot in I think it was in Nice and so forth. And man, she was dying. She was dying, and she had this argument. It was so articulate, and so she was penetrating. She was looking at Christianity not from the old Catholic standpoint, but from the Jesus standpoint. Because, as I say, she really takes these guys out for the cleaners, because and she makes no doubt, there's no doubt about it that she's endangering her life. But at any rate, what were we going to say? Marie, South America. She married a guy who was actually involved in the French attempt at making the Panama Canal. His name was Juan Nepomuceno Uribe, and he came from a very wealthy family. In fact, I think he was actually baptized in Paris. The wealthy South Americans, particularly Colombianos, they used to go to Paris. They had places, they had villas in Paris. In a sense, Colombia is nice, but you really have, if you want to live it up, you got to either go to Paris or maybe have your own villa in northern Spain and so forth. So the Uribe family is really, so we get about 3 chapters of the Uribe family, and they are a story unto themselves. The point here is, though, that your question was, what about the South American? Okay, Marie Gauguin married Juan Uribe, and she started a whole dynasty of Uribe Gauguins. So I was able to hook in with these people and find out, get stuff. So they supplied me with a lot of. In fact, this book wouldn't have been written without the Colombianos. So they, as I say, they said, "Well, what do we do?" I said, "You did everything." So, and so we really lucked out when we found them, because I wouldn't be standing here. It would be a pretty pathetic book without them. And so they provided me with letters, and in fact, Emile wrote a 38-page letter, very finely scripted. 38 pages. He was about ready to commit suicide, we think. This was towards the end of the Depression. Now, he didn't know it was the end of the Depression. He was living as a vagrant. He was living out of his car. He was every now and then he said, I'm so hungry, I gotta sell my car. And then, he's a pretty incredible guy. And so as a result of writing this letter, I was able to get to see this letter. Patty translated it, and so a good part of the book is based on his story. He answers so many questions that we were just dumbfounded. We didn't know the answers to these until he actually wrote it. Now, if you want a laugh, you can go to YouTube, type in Frank Butterworth, and you'll watch my interview on. It's kind of funny. So it's only about 10 minutes long. But if you feel like you need a laugh, go read it.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
For me to kind of explain this complicated book. There's a lot of stuff about it. This is in the appendix right here. There's just stuff with things about the Uribes, about other famous Gauguins and artists and so forth. And so and I think we're still selling it for $3 with Kindle. So get the Kindle version. You don't have to buy the paper one. It's easier. Pictures are better. We only make 60 cents on that. So. I'm not trying to get wealthy. Yeah, here, I got a joke for you. I should have started this off with a joke. And now as you're here in your captive audience, I'll tell you a little joke. Okay, there was an author, a writer, and a millionaire, and they happened to be sitting next to each other. They're flying across the country from California to some place in the east. So they were sitting next together, and they were talking, and so the millionaire was telling about he had to fly over there and open up his villa, in Tampa or someplace, Miami Beach, and then he was talking about all the places he went and all the, all his money problems and so forth. And so he says to the author, well, what would you do if you had $1 million? And the author thought, just keep writing until it's all gone. So most of the writers are not James Patterson's, and you probably know about the what was the name of that principle now? The Pareto principle. Yeah. So the Pareto principle says that you can interpret it several ways, but the really good people are the ones that are making lots of money. The rest of the people are just like me. They're doing it for the love of it. And so maybe there's the Dan Browns and James Patterson and so forth, and all these the great authors. They're at the end, and so it goes like this. And it's actually a formula for it. So you can use it the other way. And so Roger here wrote a book for starting a business. You want to say something about your book, or?
Oh, sure. It's called The 6 Pillars of Business Success. I'm a business attorney and a business coach, so I see a lot of people struggling when they start a business, especially the first 2 years. So I've kind of had an opportunity over the years as an attorney to observe what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. So I created a guide on how to build a business that's built on bedrock, which can be independent from a fluctuating economy, in a 12-chapter book. That's how I put it together. So
anyway, I have the book, and if you weren't interested, it's a great book, and you may want to be interested in looking at that book. If you're going to go into business, it's a must. Oh yeah, and there's another book there which my mother wrote, and so I'm going to be trying to publish those. And we have the artist that did the cover. You want to stand up and take a bow? So that was a good collaboration. Did a great cover, and it's a good book too. My mother wrote it back in right before the Second World War started, and so it's an interesting story. Pre-Second World War France. You like stuff like that? It's a good, lot of good history in it. And so, at any rate, that's $15. But because we're all friends, I'm going to sell it for $10. And the price has dropped on the paperback. I'm going to sell that for $15. You already got one, so you don't need to buy it. Or maybe you'd like to get one for Christmas press.
yeah, definitely.
That's the heart of an artichoke. That's a book that might be a good present for her.
I don't know, I'm just gonna take a look.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thanks for coming up. You can see all the stuff they're doing here. They got like open mic night on Friday, every third Friday. Tarot reading.
¿Cuántos?
Yeah.
You need
I did. Isn't it cool looking?
Use the square and so I can buy it, so I can see my account, and that way I can.
Yeah, that was awesome.
The IRS.
And that's very minimalistic.
Hey, we get some food here.
Dame los 20 y pago con 30 pesos.
Nice artichoke.
Ella va a comprar. Yo voy a comprar uno. Por eso.
All the greatest.
It's $38, honey. My mom's gonna get two.
It's like a
Do you?
like a food done. Really, look now.
I'm Roger.
I didn't do too bad.
Hi, I'm Roger.
No. I gave her a seat.
Oh, yeah. As I say, it's kind of tough going because it's so filled with facts and stuff, but I tried to make it lighter, but.
He had a vision, he saw it already, when the cover of the book was.
You originally said 19, but I don't know what price.
Whatever it is. It's fine.
All the data you have to. You gonna buy it?
I am.
What office did you go to?
Southwestern.
Southwest?
Yeah.
How are you? Forgive me, I don't remember your name. Angelina, that's right. Danny.
That's where I'm planning to. Next fall, hopefully.
Okay, so this is regular ranch.
It's just the outside I have the house now.
don't.
The LSAT? Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard stories.
Would you like the email to you?
I will also give you a paper receipt. Yeah. I already got my practice book in.
Yeah, I remember those exciting days.
Yeah.
What's that? I was just gonna say, the best thing to do is to get really good at isolating yourself and focusing on your studies.
The worst thing
Yeah,
I have this guy to take care of.
I remember doing the 4 years in law school because I went to night school, so I did the 4-year program because I worked, and I remember I hated it. The weekends when my friends were partying and everybody would invite me to things, and I'm like, nope, can't make it, can't make
I
it.
gotta study.
But I'll tell you what, it's worth it.
I know.
Later on down the line, it's worth it. So
That's
you
what
can
we're
do
planning.
it. Good luck.
Thank you. Huh?
In order to modify time,
Babe, you gotta fix the display. Now we're into the box.
Oh, I'm like,
that was my spot, it was Friday night, you know.
Yeah, because I was always at the mall
then you
when I
know
was
I can get this one.
younger. The mall was not even half a mile.
So full of live musicians on Friday and Saturday.
Well, I didn't see that.
Oh, yeah, no,
Which quarter was it?
oh, this one was in
I'm sorry.
Glendale. I was the one I told, like, now you just live by Glendale.
It's only 5 minutes before the store
What happened?
I injured it when I was working.
Oh, that's okay?
That's fine.
You cut it or?
No, it's just a sprain. That's all right.
Right there? That's your name? What kind of name is this? I'm on the Roscoe.
It's like where I am.
Wow.
Corbin and Roscoe.
You grew up there?
Yes.
Wow.
So you're on Winnetka and Roscoe? So
You're
Corbin's the next street.
Yeah, what going east?
Yeah, towards Tampa.
Wow. You're definitely a local.
Oh, yeah.
Ya comemos, tía, thank you. Real?
Wonderful.
Oh, hold on. Quiero un recibo. Real? Real? I don't know. Hold on. There's a clean one.
Thank you for inviting me.
The reason why I don't hang out in chat.
Card. Maybe. Show me the card. I have two copies of it, honey.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to buy one.
I'll bring my laptop because they have, I may have copied you.
1950s, they had a mini nuclear reactor there. Rocketdyne. And they were testing rockets.
Wait, where the Coca-Cola spot? Or the Coca-Cola factory? Right where,
Fan stop area in Catchment.
Nordhoff.
Well, look, I'm pretty sure you don't put the link on it.
Yes, on
Noted on page 117.
All about the children first. Yes.
Well, I'll bring it over to you.
You were born in Minnehaha.
Where's Minnehaha?
Where I thought Minnehaha was a Native American historical figure. How could you unless there's a place in the United States called Minnehaha? Oh, you're right. You remember? I remember that. I said that's an interesting name. It's a Native American.
Preparar comida para mañana en el grupo.
And they have a Hiawatha too, right? Hiawatha.
Technically it's a fish feeding, but it's like because we're all friends and stuff.
Oh,
So,
love it.
Are those parallel?
I think they're like the next, yeah, they're parallel.
if the name doesn't go to your receipt,
There's streets that have themes.
Va
Like,
esto así,
I swear there
va
was
esto
a
así.
street that had all the, like Native
Así tiene
American
que ser.
historical figure.
I don't think so.
Going back to Chatsworth.
Para que le diga quién es
It's
quién.
my favorite
¿A
system.
quién es
I
quién
thought that was just an Indian looking
Well, wait a minute, what about
I
this?
hear you.
Groundwater there.
Right?
You know,
I hear you.
I mean,
I hear you. ¿Qué para ti? Wait, ¿qué vas a hacer ahorita? Are you doing 10 or
yeah,
15?
This one's fun.
there's been like documented
Porque
stories
sabe
of
que vamos a
people
ir a mall.
living
That's like 3 streets over.
Yeah, fuck it.
yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't
Honestly, I have a
scare you,
burger
but
shirt. Give me
I
shirt.
should have told this story
Oh,
about
he
Halloween
needs
time.
We also did shoot.
That's gonna be funnier on
Or tell what's the name.
That would have been funny on your
you just say no, I'm serious.
You don't like
¿Cuál es la
them.
Thanksgiving dinner del grupo? Tomorrow is Thanksgiving.
Oh, it's tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to go? Do you want to go to church tomorrow?
Well, you'll get a lot
Do you
of
want
It's the Thanksgiving. I think tomorrow.
I can drive.
take a bite of this.
Ya me tomo el free. Okay, everything.
Ya me dijo